Tim Howard's had perfected the art of invisibility. At 45, he moved through his days like a ghost haunting his own life, present but unnoticed, functional but unremarkable. His apartment on Maple Street was a testament to this existence, clean, organised, and utterly devoid of personality. The walls bore no photographs, no artwork, nothing that might suggest dreams or aspirations beyond mere survival. Every morning at 7:15, Tim's alarm would sound, and he would rise without complaint to begin another day, identical to the thousands that had come before. His routine was as predictable as the sunrise: shower, instant coffee, 2 pieces of toast with butter, and out the door by 8. The drive to Hartwell Electronics took exactly 23 minutes, a fact he had confirmed countless times but never shared with anyone because there was no one to share it with. His cubicle in the testing department was positioned perfectly for his temperament, tucked away in a corner where he could focus on circuit boards and prototype devices without the burden of small talk. Tim was good at his job, perhaps even excellent, though excellence in solitude rarely garnered recognition. The mirror had been his enemy since childhood. Where other boys saw potential, Tim saw inadequacy. His features were unremarkable: brown hair that refused to cooperate, a face that seemed designed for forgetting, a frame that suggested neither strength nor fragility but merely existence. His mother had called him distinguished, in that way mothers do when they cannot bring themselves to say handsome. His ex-wife, Sarah, had been more direct during their final argument years ago. Since then, he had constructed a fortress of routine around his loneliness: work, dinner at Murphy's Diner, home, sleep, repeat. It was sustainable, predictable, safe. He told himself he had chosen this isolation, that it was better than the alternative of trying and failing again. But sometimes, walking past the playground near his apartment, he would see fathers pushing their children on swings and feel something twist inside his chest, a longing so acute it made him quicken his pace and avoid looking back. On this particular Tuesday evening in October, Tim slid into his usual booth by the window and opened a technical manual while waiting for his food. The diner was nearly empty, as it typically was at 6:30 on a weeknight. The bell above the door chimed occasionally as take-out customers came and went, but Tim had learned to tune out these minor disruptions to his solitude. Then she walked in. Even Tim, practiced as he was in the art of not noticing, could not ignore her presence. She was perhaps 30, with auburn hair that caught the harsh diner lighting and transformed it into something warm. Her face possessed the kind of natural beauty that needed no enhancement: high cheekbones, expressive green eyes, and a mouth that suggested both vulnerability and strength. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, but she moved with an unconscious grace that made even the mundane act of walking to a booth seem choreographed. Behind her, a small boy clutched her hand with the desperate grip of childhood anxiety. He was perhaps 5 years old, with his mother's green eyes but darker hair, and he surveyed the diner with the wariness of someone who had learned too young not to trust unfamiliar places. They slid into a booth 3 down from Tim's, and he found himself stealing glances over his technical manual. The woman, he would later learn her name was Jennifer, spread a paper napkin on the table and helped the boy, Ryan, climb onto the booth's seat. Her movements were careful, practiced, the efficiency of a mother accustomed to managing everything alone. "What looks good, baby?" she asked Ryan, though Tim noticed she was studying the prices more intently than the menu items. "Can I have chicken nuggets?" Ryan's voice was small but hopeful. Jennifer's smile was radiant even as Tim saw her fingers worry at the edge of her purse. "Of course, sweetheart. And some milk." When the waitress approached, Dolores, a woman whose kindness had been weathered but not eliminated by decades of serving others, Jennifer's ordering became a careful calculation. "We'll have the chicken nuggets kids' meal and—" She paused, scanning the menu one more time. "Just coffee for me." "You sure, hon? The pot roast's good today." "Coffee's perfect," Jennifer said, her smile never wavering despite the slight tremor Tim detected in her voice. Tim returned his attention to his manual, but his focus had been shattered. He found himself listening to their conversation, watching Ryan colour on his placemat with crayons that had seen better days. The boy was well behaved, almost unnaturally so, the kind of child who had learned early not to make demands or draw attention. When Dolores brought their order, Tim watched Jennifer count out bills and coins from her purse, once, twice, 3 times. Her smile grew more strained with each recount. "Dolores," Jennifer called softly. "I'm a little short tonight. Could I possibly pay the rest tomorrow? I have money at home, Dolores glanced around the nearly empty diner, then back at Jennifer. Her weathered face showed the conflict between compassion and policy. "I don't know, hun. Frank's pretty strict about that sort of thing." Tim watched Jennifer's composure begin to crack around the edges. Ryan continued colouring, blissfully unaware of his mother's distress, and Tim felt something shift inside his chest. Before he could consider the wisdom of his actions, he was standing, walking toward their booth. "Excuse me," he said, his voice rougher than intended from disuse. Both Jennifer and Dolores looked up at him in surprise. "I couldn't help but overhear. Please let me take care of their bill." Jennifer's face flushed with embarrassment. "Oh no, I couldn't. Really, I have money at home. I can come back tomorrow." "It's not a problem," Tim insisted, pulling out his wallet. He handed Dolores a $20 bill, more than enough to cover their meal. "Keep the change." "You really don't have to," Jennifer protested, but her relief was palpable. "Thank you," she said simply. "I'm Jennifer and this is Ryan." "Tim," he replied, extending his hand. Her grip was firm, warm, and lingered just a moment longer than necessary. As Tim returned to his booth, he found his appetite had returned along with something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose beyond merely existing. When Jennifer and Ryan finished their meal, she stopped by his table. "I meant what I said about paying you back," she said, fumbling in her purse for a pen. "Could I get your number? I promise I'm good for it." Tim gave her his number, watching as she wrote it carefully on a napkin. As they prepared to leave, Jennifer hesitated. "This is probably presumptuous," she said, "but we don't have a car, and it's getting dark. Would you mind giving us a ride? Just to the Sunset Motel on Route 9. The Sunset Motel was known throughout the city as the place people stayed when they had nowhere else to go. Tim had driven past it countless times, always looking away from its neon desperation. Now he found himself nodding. Of course. During the short drive, Ryan chattered about his drawings while Jennifer stared out the window. At a red light, she spoke quietly so her son wouldn't hear. "We were evicted last week," she said. "The motel is temporary just until I can figure something out. I have a job interview tomorrow." "What kind of work?" Tim asked, surprising himself with his interest. "Reception at a law firm. It doesn't pay much, but it's something." She turned to look at him, and Tim felt the full force of her attention, like sunlight after a long winter. "I'm not usually the kind of person who accepts help from strangers." "I'm not usually the kind of person who offers it," Tim admitted. She smiled then, genuinely, and Tim understood why his earlier life had felt like mere preparation for this moment. When they reached the motel, Jennifer helped Ryan out of the car while Tim noticed the peeling paint, the broken concrete, the atmosphere of dreams deferred. This was no place for a child, no place for someone like Jennifer. "Thank you again," she said, "for everything." "Good luck with the interview," Tim replied. As he drove home, Tim felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation. For the first time in recent memory, tomorrow held the possibility of being different from today. Jennifer called the next evening. "I got the job," she said, and Tim could hear the smile in her voice. "That's wonderful," he replied, meaning it. "I wanted to thank you again, and to ask if you'd like to have dinner with us this weekend. Nothing fancy, just pizza. It's the least I can do." Tim accepted without hesitation, and as he hung up the phone, he realized his reflection in the hallway mirror looked different somehow. Not handsome, perhaps, but no longer quite so forgettable. The weekend dinner became a regular occurrence. Jennifer would call, sometimes for advice, sometimes for help with small emergencies, sometimes just to talk. Tim found himself looking forward to these calls with an intensity that surprised him. Her voice became the highlight of his carefully ordered days. He learned that Jennifer was 29, that Ryan's father had disappeared before his birth, that she had been struggling alone for 5 years. She spoke of her dreams for Ryan, college, opportunities, a stable home, with a fierce determination that both humbled and inspired Tim. In return, he found himself sharing things he had never told anyone: his loneliness, his failed marriage, his fear that he was meant to go through life unnoticed. Ryan had become an unexpected joy. The boy was intelligent, curious, and hungry for male attention in ways that broke Tim's heart. They would spend hours building with Legos, reading books, playing catch in the small park near Tim's apartment. Watching Jennifer with her son, Tim began to understand what he had been missing his entire life. For the first time, he could envision a future that included laughter, shared meals, bedtime stories, and all the small intimacies of family life. Jennifer, for her part, maintained a careful distance from romantic involvement. She would accept Tim's help with groceries, utilities, small emergencies, but she deflected his tentative attempts at physical affection with such grace that he barely noticed the rejections. She was, she explained, focused entirely on building stability for Ryan. Romance could wait. Tim respected this boundary, even as he found himself falling deeper into what he recognized as love. Real love, not the desperate compromise that had characterized his marriage. 3 months into their relationship, Tim made the decision that would change everything. He had been considering it for weeks, lying awake at night in his empty apartment while imagining what it would be like to come home to voices, laughter, the organized chaos of family life. The numbers worked. His salary could support a mortgage, and Jennifer's steady employment, though modest, would help. But more than financial calculations, this felt like destiny. The house was perfect. A modest 3-bedroom colonial in a good school district, with a large backyard where Ryan could play safely. At $300,000, it represented the largest financial commitment of Tim's life, but also his first real investment in happiness. He spent days preparing his presentation, researching mortgage options, calculating budgets. When he finally approached Jennifer with the idea, he was as nervous as a teenager asking for a first date. "Jennifer," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. She looked up, marking her place in the book. "What is it?" "I've been thinking about our situation, about the future." Something flickered across her face. Hope, perhaps, or fear. "What about it?" "I want us to be a real family," Tim said, the words rushing out before he lost his nerve. "All of us. Together." Jennifer set down her book, giving him her full attention. "Tim. I know it's sudden," he continued, "but I've never been more certain of anything. I want to buy us a house. A real home where Ryan can have his own room, his own yard, where we can build something together." He pulled out the printed listing he had been carrying for days, his hands trembling slightly as he showed her the photographs. "I've already been pre-approved for the mortgage. We could make an offer this week." Jennifer stared at the listing, her eyes wide. Tim watched her face cycle through emotions he couldn't quite interpret: surprise, joy, something that might have been relief. "I want to do this, Jennifer. For us. For Ryan. For the family I hope we can be." When she looked up at him, tears were streaming down her face. "Yes?" she said simply. "Yes. Yes, 1,000 times. Yes." She kissed him then, the first real kiss they had shared, and Tim felt his world rearrange itself around this moment of perfect happiness. The closing was scheduled for a Friday in early December. Tim took the day off work, a rarity that reflected the magnitude of the occasion. As he signed document after document, his hand cramping from the repetitive motion, he felt he was signing his name to a new life as much as a mortgage. Jennifer met him at the house with Ryan after school, all of them clutching copies of the keys like talismans. The previous owners had left the house immaculate, and walking through the empty rooms, Tim could almost hear the echoes of the life they would build here. "Which room is mine?" Ryan asked, racing up the stairs with the boundless energy of childhood excitement. "The one with the best view of the backyard," Tim called after him, then turned to Jennifer. "Are you happy?" She wrapped her arms around his neck, her eyes bright with tears. "I never imagined I could be this happy," she said. "You gave us a home, Tim. A real home." That night, their first night in the house, they ordered pizza and ate it sitting on the floor of the living room, making plans and sharing dreams. Ryan fell asleep between them, exhausted by excitement, and Tim carried him upstairs to his new bedroom. As he tucked the boy into the sleeping bag that would serve as a bed until they could shop for furniture, Ryan grabbed his hand. "Thank you for being my dad," he whispered sleepily. Tim kissed his forehead, overwhelmed by a love so fierce it took his breath away. "Thank you for letting me." Later, as he and Jennifer sat on the front porch in the December cold, sharing a bottle of wine and watching their breath mist in the air, Tim felt complete in a way he had never imagined possible. "I love you," he told her, the words coming easily now. "I love you too," she replied, and for that moment Tim believed it completely. The house around them was quiet, waiting to be filled with years of memories, laughter, arguments, celebrations, and all the beautiful mundane moments that make up a life shared. Tim had never been happier, never felt more certain that he had finally found his place in the world. Everything was perfect. Everything was exactly as it should be. 2 months and 3 days. That's how long Tim's perfect life lasted. After dropping Ryan at school, Tim drove to work with the radio playing softly, his mind already turning to the day's projects. He was testing a new safety system for industrial electrical panels, work that required precision and patience, qualities that had always defined his professional life but now seemed enhanced by his personal happiness. Even his co-workers had noticed the change in him. "You're practically glowing these days, Howards," his supervisor had commented just last week. "Domestic life agrees with you." Tim had simply smiled and returned to his work, unwilling to share too much but unable to completely hide his contentment. He was deep in troubleshooting a particularly complex circuit problem when his phone rang at 10:47 a.m. The number was unfamiliar and Tim almost let it go to voicemail before deciding to answer. "Tim Howards. Is this Timothy Howards of 1247 Oak Street?" The voice was official, clipped, unfamiliar. "Yes, who is this?" "Sir, this is Officer Reynolds with the City Police Department. We need you to come to your residence immediately." Tim's blood turned to ice. "What's wrong? Is it my family? Are Jennifer and Ryan—" "Sir, we need you to come home now. We'll explain everything when you arrive." The line went dead, leaving Tim staring at his phone in growing panic. His hands shook as he gathered his things, his mind racing through possibilities. An accident. A break-in. Jennifer hurt. Ryan hurt. Something terrible that required police involvement and couldn't be explained over the phone. The 23-minute drive home took an eternity and no time at all. Tim broke every speed limit, ran 2 red lights, and pulled into his driveway with his heart hammering so hard he could barely see straight. 3 police cars lined the street in front of his house, their red and blue lights painting the neighborhood in ominous colors. Officer Reynolds met him at his front door to his house, though something in the policeman's stance suggested Tim no longer had any claim to either. "Timothy Howards?" "Yes, what's happened?" "Is my family—" "Sir, you're under arrest for violation of a restraining order." The words hit Tim like physical blows. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. What restraining order? Tim's voice cracked with disbelief. I don't understand. What's happening? Sir, you need to turn around and put your hands behind your back. There's been a mistake, Tim insisted, even as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. I live here. This is my house. My family. Where are Jennifer and Ryan? Ma'am, Officer Reynolds called to someone Tim couldn't see. Could you confirm this is the individual? Tim twisted in the officer's grip and saw Jennifer standing in the doorway of their home. But this wasn't the Jennifer who had kissed him goodbye that morning. This woman's face was streaked with tears, her eyes wide with what appeared to be terror. She was holding Ryan protectively against her side, and the boy's face was buried in her sweater. Yes, Jennifer said, her voice barely above a whisper. That's him. What? Tim stared at her in complete incomprehension. Jennifer, what's going on? What are you talking about? She flinched as if his voice had physically struck her, pulling Ryan closer. Please, she said to the officers, please just get him away from us. The world tilted sideways. Tim felt as if he were drowning, as if the very air had turned to water and he could no longer remember how to breathe. Jennifer, I don't understand. What's happening? What did I do? Sir, you need to stop talking and come with us, Officer Reynolds said, his patience clearly wearing thin. Ryan, Tim called out desperately as they began to lead him away. Ryan, buddy, it's me. The boy looked up then, his face streaked with tears, and Tim saw something that stopped his heart. Fear. Ryan was looking at him with fear. As they drove him away from the life he had built with such hope and care, Tim stared back at his house. The house he had bought for his family, where he had planned to grow old with the woman he loved, and raise the boy who had called him Dad. In the upstairs window he caught a glimpse of Jennifer watching them leave, but her expression was unreadable from this distance. The police station was a blur of paperwork, fingerprints, and questions Tim couldn't answer because he didn't understand them. The restraining order, when they finally showed it to him, was a nightmare of legal language and accusations that seemed to describe a completely different person. Subject has repeatedly engaged in threatening behavior toward petitioner and minor child. Physical altercations have occurred on multiple occasions, resulting in fear for safety. Subject's controlling behavior includes financial manipulation and threats of violence. Financial manipulation. Tim stared at the words until they blurred. He had given Jennifer everything: his heart, his home, his financial security. How had generosity become manipulation? Most recent incident occurred February 15th, when subject physically assaulted petitioner and threatened harm to minor child if petitioner attempted to leave relationship. February 15th, 3 days ago. Tim tried to remember what had happened 3 days ago, but it was just another ordinary evening. They had eaten dinner together, helped Ryan with his homework, watched a movie after the boy went to bed. Jennifer had fallen asleep against Tim's shoulder on the couch, and he had carried her to bed, kissing her forehead gently before settling in beside her. That was assault? That was a threat? I want to call a lawyer, Tim said finally, his voice hoarse from disbelief and the beginning of something that might have been anger. The public defender who met with him the next morning was a tired woman named Patricia Thompson, who looked as if she had heard every possible story of human failing and believed none of them. Mr. Howards, she said, spreading the paperwork across the small table in the consultation room. You're in a difficult position. Domestic violence restraining orders are taken very seriously by the courts, and the standard of evidence required to obtain one is quite low. The petitioner only needs to demonstrate a reasonable fear of harm. But I never hurt her, Tim insisted. I never even raised my voice to her. I loved her. I love her. Ms. Thompson's expression softened slightly. I believe you believe that, but the court doesn't care about your intentions, Mr. Howards. They care about her fear, and she's documented a pattern of behavior that, from her perspective, constituted abuse. What behavior? What pattern? I bought her a house, I helped with her son, According to the petition, you isolated her from friends and family by moving her to a new location. You created financial dependence by taking over housing costs. You inserted yourself into her relationship with her child. From the court's perspective, these could be seen as classic patterns of control and manipulation. Tim stared at her in growing horror. The restraining order requires you to stay at least 500 feet away from Ms. Adams and her son, and to have no contact with them whatsoever. You're also prohibited from entering the residence at 1247 Oak Street. That's my house, Tim said numbly. I'm paying the mortgage. The court will address property issues during the full hearing, which is scheduled for next month. Until then, you'll need to find somewhere else to live. The Riverside Inn was the kind of place that rented rooms by the week and didn't ask too many questions. Tim's room was small, clean, and utterly impersonal. Beige walls, a single bed, a television that only got basic cable, a window that looked out onto the parking lot of a convenience store. It was the exact opposite of home, and Tim found himself sitting on the edge of the bed each evening, staring at walls that belonged to no one and held no memories. But even from exile, he couldn't quite let go. Despite Miss Thompson's warnings, despite the legal consequences, despite his own growing understanding that his life as he had known it was over, Tim continued to pay the mortgage on the house where Jennifer and Ryan now lived without him. Each month, $2,347.83 automatically transferred from his checking account to the mortgage company. Each month, Tim's bank balance dwindled while he paid rent on a room that felt like a cell and a mortgage on a home where he was no longer welcome. His co-workers didn't ask about his changed circumstances, but Tim could feel their sideways glances, their whispered conversations that stopped when he approached. The weeks crawled by with agonizing slowness. Tim went to work, ate meals that tasted like cardboard, and spent his evenings in his motel room reading legal documents and trying to understand how his life had become unrecognizable. He lost weight, developed insomnia, and began to see the world through a haze of exhaustion and disbelief. Sometimes late at night he would drive past the house, carefully maintaining the required 500-foot distance, parking where he could just glimpse the windows. The lights would be on, and he could imagine Jennifer and Ryan inside, living the life that should have included him. Were they happy without him? Did Ryan ask where his dad had gone? Did Jennifer explain why the man who had read him bedtime stories and helped with homework was suddenly too dangerous to be around? Other times the pain was so acute that Tim wondered if he was losing his mind. He would find himself composing letters he could never send, planning explanations for encounters that would never happen, imagining conversations where Jennifer would realize she had made a terrible mistake and beg him to come home. Tim began to prepare for court with renewed energy. He gathered character references from co-workers, from neighbors who had seen him with Ryan, from anyone who could testify to his gentle nature. He made lists of all the ways he had supported Jennifer and Ryan, all the evidence of his love and commitment. Surely, when presented with the facts, the judge would see that he was not the monster the restraining order made him out to be. When morning came, Tim dressed in his best suit and drove to the courthouse with something approaching optimism for the first time in weeks. He was going to fight for his family, for the life they had built together, for the future he still believed was possible. He had no idea that Jennifer had spent the previous evening making very different preparations, or that the hearing would bring not vindication, but a revelation so devastating it would shatter everything Tim thought he knew about love, trust, and the woman who had become the center of his world. As Tim walked up the courthouse steps, his mind was filled with plans for rebuilding, for healing, for proving his innocence to the people he loved. He was thinking about taking Ryan to the Science Museum, about quiet dinners with Jennifer, about all the ordinary miracles of family life that he was determined to reclaim. He was thinking about coming home. He had no way of knowing that home, as he understood it, had never really existed at all. Tim sat beside Ms. Thompson at the defendant's table, his hands folded so tightly in his lap that his knuckles had gone white. Across the aisle, Jennifer sat with her own attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Rebecca Walsh, who specialized in domestic violence cases. Jennifer wore a simple black dress that made her look fragile and vulnerable, her auburn hair pulled back in a way that emphasized the delicate bones of her face. She kept her eyes downcast, occasionally dabbing at them with a tissue, the picture of a woman still traumatized by her ordeal. Tim stared at her, searching for some sign of the woman who had fallen asleep against his shoulder just weeks ago. But this Jennifer was a stranger, wounded, frightened, unreachable. "Your Honour," Ms. Walsh began, rising with practiced grace, "my client seeks to make permanent the restraining order currently in place against Mr. Howards. The evidence will show a clear pattern of escalating abuse, financial manipulation, and threats of violence that have left Ms. Adams and her young son in genuine fear for their safety." Judge Hawthorne nodded curtly. "Ms. Adams, please take the stand." Jennifer rose slowly, as if the very act of standing required tremendous courage. As she walked to the witness box, Tim noticed she was trembling slightly. Or perhaps it was a performance so subtle that even he, who had loved her, couldn't tell the difference. "Ms. Adams," her attorney began gently, "please tell the court about your relationship with the defendant." Jennifer's voice was barely above a whisper, forcing everyone in the courtroom to lean forward to hear her. "Tim seemed so kind at first. He helped me when I was struggling, when my son and I had nowhere to go. I thought he was a good man." "When did that perception begin to change?" "Gradually," Jennifer said, her voice gaining strength. "At first, it was small things. He would get upset if I wanted to spend time with friends. He said he was just concerned about my safety, but it felt like he was trying to isolate me. Then he insisted on paying for everything: rent, food, Ryan's school supplies. When I tried to contribute, he would get angry." Tim felt his chest tighten. Angry. He had never been angry about her wanting to help with expenses. He had been touched by her independence, but had wanted to provide for them, to take care of the people he loved. "He convinced me to move into a house he bought," Jennifer continued, "but it became clear that he saw it as his house, not ours. He would watch me constantly, question where I went, who I talked to. If I was 5 minutes late coming home from work, he would interrogate me about it." The words hit Tim like physical blows. He remembered waiting by the window when Jennifer was late, but it had been worry, not suspicion. He had been terrified something might happen to the woman he loved, not trying to control her movements. "Please describe the incident that led you to seek the restraining order," Ms. Walsh prompted. Jennifer closed her eyes as if gathering courage to relive a traumatic memory. "It was a Tuesday evening. Ryan was doing his homework, and I was making dinner. Tim came home from work in a rage about something. He grabbed my arm so hard it left bruises." She pulled up her sleeve to show what appeared to be faded marks on her forearm. "He said if I ever tried to leave him, he would make sure I never saw Ryan again, that he would tell everyone I was an unfit mother and have Ryan taken away from me." Tim's world tilted. Tuesday evening. He tried to remember, but the days had blurred together in his happiness. He remembered coming home to the smell of dinner cooking, to Ryan's excited chatter about his day at school, to Jennifer's smile as she kissed him hello. When had any of that become violent? When had love become a threat? "He said the house was in his name, that I had no rights to anything," Jennifer continued, tears now flowing freely. "He said I was nothing without him, that no one would believe me if I tried to tell them what he was really like. That's when I knew I had to get away, for Ryan's sake if not my own." "Your Honour," Ms. Thompson said, rising to her feet, "I object to this testimony. There's no corroborating evidence of any of these alleged incidents. No police reports, no medical records, no witnesses." "The bruises speak for themselves," Miss Walsh interjected. Bruises that could have come from anywhere, Ms. Thompson countered. Your Honour, my client has no history of violence. He has character witnesses who will testify to his gentle nature, his devotion to Miss Adams and her son. I'll hear from those witnesses in due course, Judge Hawthorne said. Ms. Adams, what is it you're seeking from the court today? Jennifer straightened in her chair, and for a moment, Tim caught a glimpse of something in her eyes that looked less like fear and more like determination. I want the restraining order to be made permanent. I want Tim to stay away from me and my son, and... She hesitated, as if what she was about to say pained her greatly. I want him to continue paying the mortgage on the house. It's the least he can do after what he put us through. Ryan needs stability, and moving again would be traumatic for him. Tim felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. She wanted him to pay for a house he could never enter, to support a life he could never share, to be financially responsible for people who had branded him as dangerous. It was punishment disguised as restitution, exile funded by the exile himself. Your Honour, Ms. Thompson said, my client bought that house as a gift for his family. To require him to continue payments while being denied access to the property is unconscionable. The unconscionable thing, Ms. Walsh interrupted, is the trauma he inflicted on a woman and child who trusted him. Ms. Adams gave up her independence, her autonomy, her sense of safety to be with Mr. Howard's. The financial support is not punishment. It's justice. Judge Hawthorne considered this exchange with the weary expression of someone who had heard similar arguments countless times. Ms. Thompson, call your first witness. For the next hour, Tim watched his character witnesses take the stand one by one. His supervisor testified to his calm demeanour at work, his reliability, his reputation as someone who never raised his voice or lost his temper. His neighbour spoke about seeing Tim playing catch with Ryan in the backyard, about the obvious affection between them. A co-worker described Tim as the last person on earth you'd suspect of violence. But Tim could see it wasn't working. In domestic violence cases, the logic seemed to be that the absence of public violence meant nothing, that monsters were skilled at hiding their true nature from the world while terrorizing their victims in private. Every testimony to his good character could be dismissed as evidence of his manipulative skill rather than his innocence. Ms. Thompson called Tim to the stand as her final witness, and he approached the witness box on unsteady legs. Under oath, he told his version of the story, how he had fallen in love with Jennifer and Ryan, how he had wanted to provide for them, to build a life together. His voice broke as he described his genuine affection for Ryan, his joy at being called Dad, his devastation at being cast out of the life he had tried so hard to build. Mr. Howard's, Ms. Thompson asked, did you ever physically assault Miss Adams? Never, Tim said firmly. I loved her. I would never hurt her or Ryan. Did you ever threaten to take Ryan away from her? Number I wanted us to be a family. Why would I threaten to break up the family I was trying to create? But under cross-examination, Ms. Walsh systematically dismantled his testimony. Every act of generosity became evidence of control. His desire to provide became financial manipulation. His love for Ryan became inappropriate involvement with another man's child. By the time she was finished, Tim felt as if his entire character had been twisted into something unrecognizable. Judge Hawthorne was preparing to render her decision when the courtroom doors opened with a soft creak. All heads turned to see a woman in her 60s entering quietly, her silver hair neatly styled and her face bearing the kind of lines that spoke of both laughter and sorrow. She was dressed simply but with dignity, and something in her bearing commanded attention. Jennifer's face went white, then red, then white again. I'm sorry I'm late, Your Honour, the woman said, her voice clear and steady. My name is Monica Adams. I believe my testimony is relevant to this case. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Jennifer gripped the arms of her chair so tightly that Tim could see her knuckles turning white from across the room. Her attorney leaned over to whisper urgently in her ear, but Jennifer seemed incapable of responding. "Your Honour," Ms. Walsh said, rising quickly, "this witness was not disclosed. We object to any testimony." "I'm the defendant's mother," Monica said simply, looking directly at Jennifer. "And I have information this court needs to hear." Jennifer made a sound, a small, strangled gasp that carried clearly in the silent room. For a moment, Tim thought she might faint. Judge Hawthorne studied the older woman with obvious interest. "Ms. Adams, you're related to the petitioner?" "She's my daughter," Monica confirmed, "and I know her better than anyone in this room." "Your Honour," Ms. Walsh tried again, "this is highly irregular." "So is perjury," Monica said calmly, "which is what my daughter has committed here today." The courtroom erupted in whispers and shuffling. Judge Hawthorne banged her gavel once. "Order. Ms. Adams, you understand you're making a serious accusation." "I understand perfectly, Your Honour. And I'm prepared to testify under oath about my daughter's pattern of manipulation and fraud." Jennifer finally found her voice. "Mother, you don't understand." "I understand better than you think," Monica said, her eyes never leaving her daughter's face. "I've understood for 20 years. I just didn't have the courage to stop you until now." Judge Hawthorne looked between mother and daughter, her expression suggesting this case had just become far more interesting than she had anticipated. "Ms. Adams, approach the bench." As Monica walked to the witness stand, Jennifer whispered frantically to her attorney, but Tim could see the panic in her eyes, the desperate calculation of someone whose carefully constructed story was about to crumble. Monica settled into the witness chair with the composure of someone who had made peace with a difficult decision. When she looked at Jennifer, her expression was heartbroken but resolved. Tim found himself leaning forward, hardly daring to breathe. Whatever was about to happen would determine not just the outcome of this hearing, but the rest of his life. "Please tell the court what you know about your daughter's relationship with Mr. Howard's," Judge Hawthorne said. Monica took a deep breath. "Your Honour, Jennifer has been a manipulator since childhood. Not just mischievous or difficult, a calculated, methodical manipulator who uses people's emotions against them to get what she wants." "That's a serious accusation. Can you provide specific examples?" "When Jennifer was 16, there was a house fire in our neighbourhood. A family of 4 barely escaped with their lives. The authorities investigated but couldn't determine the cause." Monica's voice remained steady, but Tim could see the pain in her eyes. "What they didn't know was that my son David, Jennifer's older brother, had set that fire on Jennifer's instructions." The courtroom was dead silent. Jennifer had gone so pale that Tim worried she might actually collapse. "How do you know this?" Judge Hawthorne asked. "Because I overheard them arguing about it months later. David was refusing to do something Jennifer wanted, and she threatened to tell everyone about the fire. That's when I learned the truth, that David had set the fire, but Jennifer had planned it. She was obsessed with crime shows, police procedurals. She knew exactly how to do it without leaving evidence." Tim felt sick. The woman he had loved, who had seemed so gentle and vulnerable, had orchestrated arson that could have killed a family. "From that moment on," Monica continued, "Jennifer used that knowledge to control David completely. Any time she wanted something, money, favors, cover for her other schemes, she would threaten to expose him. She turned my son into her unwilling accomplice through blackmail." "Why didn't you report this to the authorities?" Monica's composure finally cracked slightly. "Because David is my son too, and because I kept hoping Jennifer would change, that she would grow out of it. I was weak, Your Honour. I chose to protect my family over doing what was right, and innocent people have paid the price for my cowardice." She looked directly at Tim then, her eyes filled with regret. "Including Mr. Howard's?" "Tell the court about Mr. Howard's relationship with your daughter," Judge Hawthorne said. "I watched Jennifer manipulate that good man from the very beginning," Monica said, her voice growing stronger. "She researched him, learned about his loneliness, his failed marriage, his desperate desire for a family. She played him like a violin. Jennifer finally spoke, her voice shaking with either fear or rage. "You're lying. You're jealous because Tim loved me more than—" "Silence," Judge Hawthorne snapped. "Ms. Adams, continue." "Jennifer came to me the day before she filed the restraining order," Monica said. "She told me this elaborate story about Tim's abuse, but something didn't add up. She claimed he had bruised her arm, but when I asked to see the bruises, she said they had faded. When I pressed for details, her story kept changing." Monica paused, gathering herself for what was clearly the most difficult part of her testimony. The final straw was when she told me she had gotten the restraining order approved so quickly because David, who's now a police officer, had expedited the process. The pieces clicked into place for Tim with sickening clarity. Officer Reynolds, who had arrested him. David Adams, Jennifer's brother, still under her control after all these years, still dancing to her tune to keep his secret safe. "I confronted her," Monica continued. "I told her this had gone too far, that she needed to tell the truth and let Mr. Howard's come home to his family. That's when she showed me who she really is." "What do you mean?" "She said if I tried to interfere, she would claim I was lying to protect my violent son-in-law," Monica continued, "that no one would believe a desperate mother over a terrified victim of domestic abuse." Judge Hawthorne leaned back in her chair, her expression grave. "Ms. Adams, you understand that this testimony implicates your son in official misconduct and your daughter in perjury and fraud?" "I understand completely, Your Honor. I should have spoken up years ago when the fire happened. I've been a coward, and innocent people have suffered because of my silence, but I won't be silent anymore." Jennifer was shaking now, her carefully crafted victim persona completely shattered. "You're ruining everything," she hissed at her mother. "You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand exactly what I'm doing," Monica replied. "I'm finally being the mother I should have been all along." Judge Hawthorne turned to Jennifer's attorney. "Ms. Walsh, does your client wish to respond to these allegations?" Ms. Walsh looked as shocked as everyone else in the courtroom. She leaned over to consult with Jennifer, but Tim could see that the case was over. Jennifer's face had transformed from that of a frightened victim to something harder, more calculating, the face of someone whose mask had finally slipped completely. "Your Honor," Ms. Walsh said finally, "I need to request a recess to consult with my client." "Denied," Judge Hawthorne said firmly. "Ms. Adams, the younger Ms. Adams, these are serious allegations. Do you wish to respond?" Jennifer sat silent for a long moment, and Tim could practically see the calculations running through her mind. Could she salvage this? Could she convince the court that her mother was lying, jealous, delusional? Finally, she looked up at the judge, and Tim saw something in her eyes that chilled him. Not fear or remorse, but cold, calculating fury. "I want to speak to my attorney privately," Jennifer said. "You can speak to your attorney after I render my decision," Judge Hawthorne replied. "Based on the testimony I've heard today, I'm immediately dissolving the restraining order against Mr. Howard's. Furthermore, I'm ordering an investigation into how this order was obtained and whether any laws were broken in the process." She looked directly at Jennifer, her expression stern. "Ms. Adams, you will vacate the property at 1247 Oak Street within 48 hours. Mr. Howard's, you're free to return to your home immediately." The gavel came down with a sound that seemed to echo through Tim's entire body. Around him, the courtroom erupted in whispers and movement, but Tim sat frozen, trying to process what had just happened. He was free, he could go home, the nightmare was over. But as he looked at Jennifer, really looked at her, Tim realized that the woman he had loved had never existed at all. She had been a mirage, a carefully constructed lie designed to extract everything she could from a lonely man desperate for connection. The victory felt hollow, tainted by the knowledge of how completely he had been deceived. As court officers approached Jennifer to discuss the investigation that would surely follow, Tim stood on unsteady legs. Monica Adams approached him, her face filled with compassion and regret. "Mr. Howards," she said softly, "I am so very sorry. If I had spoken up sooner—" "You spoke up when it mattered," Tim interrupted. "Thank you. Thank you for having the courage to tell the truth." Monica nodded, tears in her eyes. "Jennifer is my daughter, and I love her. But what she did to you, what she's done to others, it had to stop." Tim looked back at Jennifer one more time. She was speaking urgently to her attorney, still scheming, still calculating, still believing she could manipulate her way out of the consequences of her actions. The sight of her filled him not with anger, but with profound sadness. For the love that had never been real, for the family that had been nothing but an elaborate lie, for the innocence he had lost. "What will happen to Ryan?" Tim asked Monica. "He's a good boy," she said. "Whatever happens with Jennifer, I'll make sure he's taken care of. He deserves better than this." Tim nodded, thinking of the child who had called him Dad, who had been as much a victim of Jennifer's manipulations as anyone. "If there's anything I can do to help—" "Just take care of yourself," Monica said gently. "You've been through enough." As Tim walked out of the courthouse, he felt the afternoon sun on his face for the first time in weeks without the weight of impending doom. He was free to go home, free to reclaim his life, free from the woman who had systematically destroyed everything he had offered her. But freedom, Tim was learning, was more complicated than he had imagined. 6 months later, Tim sat on the front porch of his house, legally and emotionally his once again, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. The silence was different now than it had been before Jennifer and Ryan entered his life. It wasn't the hollow silence of loneliness, but the peaceful quiet of someone who had learned to distinguish between being alone and being lonely. The house felt larger without them, but not empty. Tim had slowly reclaimed each room, replacing memories of deception with new experiences of authenticity. The kitchen where Jennifer had cooked meals while planning his downfall now hosted dinners with Monica, who had become an unexpected friend and confidant. The living room where he had read bedtime stories to a child who was never really his now served as a reading nook where Tim was slowly rediscovering books that had nothing to do with legal proceedings or self-doubt. Monica visited regularly, their friendship forged in the fire of shared trauma and mutual healing. She was nothing like her daughter, direct where Jennifer had been manipulative, honest where Jennifer had been deceptive, genuinely caring where Jennifer had simply performed care. Through Monica, Tim was learning what authentic relationship looked like, how different it felt to trust someone whose affection didn't come with hidden agendas. "You're too good for your own good," Monica had told him just the week before, as they shared coffee and discussed Tim's latest act of inexplicable kindness, helping a co-worker move apartments despite barely knowing the man. "I thought that was what got me into trouble," Tim had replied. "No," Monica had said firmly. "What got you into trouble was not recognizing the difference between someone who needed help and someone who was hunting for victims. There's a difference between being kind and being naive." The investigation into Jennifer's fraud had moved slowly but inexorably forward. David Adams had been suspended from the police force pending a full review of his conduct. Jennifer faced charges of perjury, fraud, and conspiracy. The case had made local headlines. Woman fabricates abuse, claims to steal house. Tim had read the articles once, then put them away. He didn't need to relive the nightmare to learn from it. Ryan, as Monica had promised, was being cared for. He was living with Monica while Jennifer's legal troubles sorted themselves out, and Tim occasionally saw him at the grocery store or the park. The boy was thriving in his grandmother's stable care, his natural resilience helping him recover from his mother's toxic influence. The first time they had encountered each other, Tim pushing a cart through the cereal aisle while Ryan walked beside Monica, had been awkward and painful. Ryan had looked at Tim with confusion and a child's version of betrayal, not understanding why the man who had been his father had suddenly disappeared. "Why did you leave?" Ryan had asked, his small voice carrying the weight of abandonment. Tim had knelt to the boy's level, choosing his words carefully. I didn't want to leave, buddy. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes that hurt people, and I had to go away until everything got sorted out. Are you coming back? Tim had looked at Monica, who nodded encouragingly. I'm not going to be your dad anymore, Tim had said gently, but I'm still your friend, and I still care about you. Your grandma is going to take really good care of you. It wasn't the reunion either of them might have hoped for, but it was honest, and honesty, Tim was learning, was more valuable than comfortable lies. Now, 6 months later, Tim was beginning to understand what Monica meant about learning to distinguish between kindness and naivety. He still helped people, it was fundamental to who he was, but he paid attention to patterns now, to red flags, to the difference between someone in genuine need and someone looking for their next mark. He had started dating again, cautiously. Sarah, a colleague from another department at work, was nothing like Jennifer. She was plain where Jennifer had been beautiful, straightforward where Jennifer had been mysterious, financially independent where Jennifer had been desperately needy. Their relationship was developing slowly, built on shared interests and genuine compatibility rather than rescue fantasies and manipulated emotions. You're different than most men I've dated, Sarah had told him recently. More careful, like you're watching for something. I guess I am, Tim had admitted. I learned some hard lessons about trust. Good, Sarah had said simply. Trust should be earned, not given away freely. Tim was learning that too. Trust, respect, love, all of it was more valuable when it developed naturally, rather than being manufactured through manipulation and exploitation. The mortgage on the house was nearly current again. Tim's savings account, while still smaller than it had been before Jennifer, was slowly recovering. More importantly, his sense of self-worth was rebuilding on a foundation of hard-won wisdom rather than desperate loneliness. He thought about Jennifer sometimes, but not with the devastating pain that had characterized the first months after the trial. She had been sentenced to 2 years in prison for fraud and perjury, and Tim felt neither satisfaction nor sorrow at the news. She was simply part of his past now, a chapter in his story that had taught him valuable lessons about the nature of love and deception. As the sun finished setting and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Tim stood and stretched, ready to go inside to the life he was building for himself, a life based on reality rather than fantasy, on earned trust rather than desperate hope, on genuine connection rather than manufactured need. The house was quiet as he locked the front door behind him, but it was a good quiet. It was the silence of peace rather than loneliness, of contentment rather than desperation. For the first time in his 45 years, Tim Howards was learning to be happy with who he was, with or without someone else to complete him. And in that hard-won self-acceptance, he was discovering that genuine love, when it came, would be built on a foundation strong enough to last. The nightmare was over. Real life could finally begin.